that's going to ensure capital growth for you without you having to do anything. I think it's super important to understand why you're buying an investment property and what are the key things you need to look for when buying an investment property. We get inundated with advice, whether it's from Domain and articles in the paper about what type of investment to buy and why, and what's growing, what's not growing. It might be your parents' advice or their thought process. Today it's really about me just giving you what I think in terms of real estate are the key things that you need to consider when you buy an investment property. The number one thing, or the first thing to decide, is what do I hope to achieve when buying an investment property? Are you buying an investment property because you are looking for a high rental yield, you need that cash flow coming in, or are you looking for a rental property because you want capital growth over time? You can get both, but not usually one exclusively without the other. I think people as they get older, probably capital growth is less of a concern. It's more about cash flow. It's more about managing investments for that money that you're going to live off when you're not working full time. Whereas when you're younger, you can probably take more risks. You can have less rental return, but sitting on a property that's going to gain more capital growth over time. And so deciding on why and what it is you hope to achieve from your investment is the first step. The next thing to do is look at some key factors. We used to traditionally think of investment properties as you need to buy close to the city or close to a train line. Those were probably the deciding factors of everyone when they decide to buy an investment property. Today, there's a couple of things that are more important or largely important in that decision. School zones in Melbourne are so important. The capital growth rate over time within school zones in Melbourne is obviously a key decision making or driving factor in where you should buy an investment property. If you can sit within one of those key school zones, you're almost guaranteed capital growth over time. Other locations, of course, inner city is always going to have a higher capital growth rate, blue chip areas, if you can afford to get into those areas. But at the same time, if you can't afford to get the land component in those areas, because land is what equals capital growth, then you might need to move further out. But there's plenty of real estate in metropolitan Melbourne within great school zones that are going to have high capital growth over time and offer land with opportunity to it as well. So I think the first step is understanding where I'm going to buy it. Are they going to be school zone related? What are the amenities? Good cafes, good restaurants around it as well, that lifestyle that people are looking for. Suburbs that have that are always going to be in high demand for years and years to come. So I think I would make decisions based on school zones. I'd make decisions based on the amenities nearby as well. Just a second ago, I alluded to land value and what gives capital growth. If your strategy is around capital growth, then certainly the land component and the size of land becomes important. And the balance between, do I go really far out and get a large block and have virtually very little rental return versus coming closer to the city where you have a smaller block perhaps that you can afford or purchase. There is a balanced approach there. And again, that sort of middle ring of suburban Melbourne is a great place to be able to find good allotments of land that are going to grow in capital. And that is what I would look for. One key thing to look for though is look at the land component and understand, with talking to local agents and council, what can I do to that land? Can I put 2 units on it? Can I put 3 units on it? And try to buy a land component that's going to comfortably allow to put a minimum of 2 townhouses or units on that block. That is where capital growth lives. Now, don't try to buy land that's just on the cusp of that amount. So don't look at land that might be 600 square meters and council are just allowing 600 square meters, because if council change their rules, and they have before, around open spaces, then you might find yourself sitting in a property that you can no longer put 2 townhouses on. And this has been a mistake I've seen many people make. So look for a comfortable allotment of land that can fit those 2 townhouses or 3 townhouses depending on your budget. But that would be one of my key tips when buying an investment property. The debate will always continue about out of area properties. Should I buy further out? And again, it does come down to your budget. It does come down to those future choices as well. Inner city properties, yes, they're going to have smaller land, but if they're in a blue chip area, they'll grow in value and they'll provide good rental return. I think it's best to seek the advice of an agent locally to look at your budget as well to make the right decision. But it's almost like a consulting thing. I think you need to consult a professional before you go ahead and decide what investment you are going to purchase. Because if you're going to buy further out and you're buying that bigger block of land, you may have to be waiting some time before you see that capital growth. And if your strategy was to sell in 5 years and somehow have all this extra money, it may not be there. If you buy too far out and buy that big block, and you're waiting on a return within 2, 3, or 5 years. So again, I think being really clear on why and when you want to reap the benefits of the return, and then seeking the advice of the person that's going to help guide you in that area, that's going to be the smart choice. The next thing to consider is the future sales market, and that sort of rolls hand in hand to what we've been talking about today. Is the property near power lines or under power lines? Is it on a main road? Is there something that will always mean that it won't grow in value as much as other properties? And they're things to consider. Things like I said before, school zones are being important to create that future sales aspect. If you see a school that has had improving scores year on year, and the information coming through in the community is the improvement in a school or the investment in infrastructure, then you think it probably is a safe bet to be able to invest in an area like that, because in 5 or 10 or 15 years, the reputation of that school, the infrastructure, the money being spent in those areas, that's going to ensure capital growth for you without you having to do anything. Probably one of the final things to consider is the condition of the property as well. A lot of property at the moment is probably suffering in terms of its condition and how much money you may have to spend on it. I've seen many people buy investment properties where they've spent so much money in maintaining it, fixing it, repairing it, that all of their rental return is being eaten up in repairs. And they're also buying in an area where the capital growth is just not there as well. And it becomes a dead investment. Right now, there's new legislation that has just come through. There is a bunch of new regulations that have come through as well, which I can give you more information on. But those regulations mean that there's tighter restrictions on how you have to maintain your investment property. So the last thing you want to do is buy in a property that is unrentable or that requires major maintenance, because the level or the expectation of tenants and the new rules in place mean that you're going to have to keep that property to a very strong livable standard going forward. So I think it's you can no longer look for that property that's the worst property in the best street. That's worth looking at, but make sure it's rentable. Make sure you've got someone on your side that can assess that property before you purchase it to understand what money you're going to be out for in continual maintenance. And that's going to be one of the smart things and one of the newest things that you need to look at when buying an investment property.